I didn't plan on starting a war that summer, but when I pulled into my driveway and saw my fence ripped clean out of the ground like it had never existed, something in me just snapped. Not the loud kind of snap either, the quiet kind, the kind that settles deep in your chest and waits. And the worst part wasn't even the damage. It was the assumption behind it. Like whoever did it believed I wouldn't fight back, or worse, that I couldn't. I remember sitting there in my truck longer than I should have, engine still running, just staring across what used to be my pasture line. The fence had been there since my dad rebuilt it in the late 90s, nothing fancy, just solid cedar posts, wire pulled tight, built to last through storms and stubborn horses. Now it was gone, posts uprooted, rails stacked off to the side like scrap wood, and my land just open, exposed. First thing I did was check the animals. That's instinct. You don't think, you move. I jogged out toward the corral half expecting chaos. But my horses were still there, calm as ever, like they didn't realize how close they'd come to wandering onto a paved walking trail full of people who probably thought hay came from a grocery store aisle. That's when I noticed the notice. Stapled to one of the broken posts, flapping slightly in the breeze like it had something to say. Laminated, of course, because nothing says authority like a piece of plastic over paper. I walked over, pulled it off, and read it once, then again slower, just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it. Fence does not comply with community aesthetic standards. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd it didn't register any other way. Community? I wasn't part of their community. Never had been. My land wrapped around the backside of that gated neighborhood like a horseshoe. 80 acres of pasture and dirt and work. While they had their trimmed hedges and polished sidewalks, and that oversized country club sitting right in the center like a trophy. We'd coexisted for years. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. I kept to myself, they kept to theirs. Every once in a while someone would wave from the trail, or slow down to look at the horses, but that was about it. Until recently. A couple months back, I started noticing more people stopping along that fence line. Not just looking, judging. You can tell the difference. Arms crossed, heads tilted, like they were evaluating something that didn't meet expectations. One guy even had the nerve to take pictures. I didn't say anything at the time, figured it was just curiosity, maybe boredom. Guess it wasn't. I followed the tire tracks next. Big ones, not your average pickup. These were heavy, deep grooves pressed into the soil, cutting straight across my land like they belonged there. They led all the way out to the service road, the one contractors used to access the neighborhood when they were building new homes. And that's when the picture started forming. See, there's a certain kind of confidence it takes to send a crew onto someone else's property and tear something down in broad daylight. That kind of confidence doesn't come from guesswork, it comes from backing. Authority. Or at least the illusion of it. I got back in my truck and followed those tracks. Took me about 15 minutes to find the yard. Equipment parked out front, stacks of materials, a couple guys loading tools into a trailer like it was just another day. I stepped out, walked up slow, and asked the first guy I saw if he knew anything about a fence removal job out on Ridge Hollow Road. He didn't even hesitate. "Oh yeah," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That HOA job, right? President signed off on it. Said the fence was non-compliant." I just stood there for a second, letting that sink in. "You got permission from the landowner?" I asked. He shrugged, actually shrugged. They said it was taken care of. Of course they did. I thanked him, calm, polite, probably calmer than he expected, then got back in my truck and drove home. And the whole way back, I wasn't thinking about the fence anymore. I was thinking about something else. Something they'd clearly forgotten, or maybe never even knew to begin with. See, long before that neighborhood existed, before the gates, before the clubhouse, before the walking trails and HOA meetings and whatever else they spent their time arguing about, that land was just land. And when the developers first came through, trying to turn it into something profitable, they ran into a problem. Water. There wasn't a reliable source on their side. Not one that could support a full development with amenities, especially not something like a country club pool that needed constant filtration and refill. So they came to my dad. I still remember bits of that conversation, sitting at the kitchen table, my dad listening more than he talked, letting them explain what they needed. They offered money at first, he turned it down. Said if we were going to do this, it needed to be simple. And it was. Handshake agreement. They could tap into our well, and in return, we'd get access through their paved roads, easier transport, better entry during bad weather. No contracts, no lawyers, just trust. And for years that worked. Until now. Because standing there in my pasture, holding that laminated notice in my hand, I realized something. They hadn't just torn down my fence. They'd just broken the one thing that agreement was built on. And trust, once it's gone, well, it doesn't usually come back the same. I glanced out toward the far edge of my property, where a small metal structure sat just beyond the tree line. Nothing impressive. Most people wouldn't even notice it unless they knew what they were looking at. But I did. That little building was the heart of everything they thought they owned. And for the first time since I bought this land from my dad, I started wondering what would happen if it just stopped. I didn't march out there right away. That's the thing people get wrong when they imagine stories like this. They think it's all heat, all impulse, like I stormed straight to that pump house and twisted a valve out of pure anger. But it wasn't like that. Not exactly. I went inside first, washed my hands, poured myself a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, and sat down at the same kitchen table where my dad had made that handshake deal years ago. And I just sat there. Because once you cross a line like that, there's no stepping back over it. And I needed to be real sure I wasn't about to make a move I couldn't live with. The quiet in that house felt different that afternoon. Heavier. Like it was waiting on me to decide what kind of man I was going to be. I kept replaying that contractor's shrug in my head. That casual, they said it was taken care of. That's what got to me the most. Not even the damage. It was the assumption. The idea that I didn't matter enough to ask. And then I thought about my dad. He wasn't a loud man. Didn't argue much. But he had a way of drawing lines you didn't cross, and everybody knew it. Not because he threatened anything, but because he meant what he said. And suddenly it hit me. If he were still here, sitting across from me at that table, what would he say? Probably something simple. They didn't respect you, so why are you still honoring their side of the deal? That was it. No anger. No speech. Just clarity. I set the coffee down, stood up, grabbed my keys, and this time, I didn't hesitate. The pump house sat about a quarter mile from the main road, tucked behind a line of old oaks that had been there longer than any of us. It was just a small metal structure, paint chipped in places, door a little crooked on the hinges, but inside, everything was solid. Maintained. Functional. Because my dad had believed that if you're going to let people depend on something, you make damn sure it works. I unlocked the door and stepped in. There's a sound you notice right away in a place like that, a steady hum, low and constant, like a heartbeat. Pumps running, water moving, pressure holding steady. I'd heard that sound my whole life. Never really paid attention to it before. But that day, it felt different. I walked over to the control panel, ran my hand along the edge of it, and for a second, I hesitated again. Not because I didn't know what I was about to do, but because I knew exactly what it would set in motion. Then I reached down and turned the supply valve to closed. The hum didn't stop right away. It never does. There's always a delay, like the system itself is trying to understand what just happened. But I knew, and I stood there long enough to feel it shift, pressure dropping, flow cutting off, and then I stepped back outside, locked the door behind me, and headed home. No announcement, no warning, just silence. The first day, nothing happened. At least not anything you could see from the outside. That's the thing about systems like that. They don't fail all at once. They unravel. Slowly. Quietly. By midday, I figured the filters at the country club were starting to notice. Without fresh input, everything just cycles the same water over and over again, and eventually, that water stops being what it's supposed to be. That evening, I took a drive. Didn't go into the neighborhood, didn't need to. There's a stretch of road just outside the main gate where you can see the pool area through a break in the trees. And sure enough, it still looked fine. Blue. Clean, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. Day 2. That's when things started shifting. I got a call mid-morning from a number I didn't recognize. Let it ring. Then another. And another. Same number. Persistent. I finally picked up on the 4th try. Is this Daniel Mercer? A woman's voice asked, sharp, controlled, the kind of tone people use when they're used to being listened to. Depends who's asking, I said. This is Caroline Bishop, president of Ridge Hollow Estates HOA. We're experiencing an issue with our water supply, and we've been informed your well may be connected to our system. Maybe. I almost smiled at that. Sounds like something you should have confirmed before tearing down my fence, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but long enough. I'm not sure what you're referring to. she replied, voice tightening just a little. Then I guess we're both learning things this week, I said, and hung up. I didn't hear back that day, but I didn't need to, because by that evening, the change was visible. That same stretch of road, same angle through the trees. But this time, the water didn't have that same shine. It was duller, slightly off, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. I was. Day 3. That's when it turned. You could smell it before you even saw it. Not terrible, not yet, but enough to know something wasn't right. Warm chlorine mixed with something organic, something starting to grow where it shouldn't. And the color, that perfect blue they were so proud of, it had shifted. Not all at once, just patches at first, faint green threading through the surface like veins. That afternoon, they came knocking. 2 of them, Caroline, and another guy I recognized from around the neighborhood, probably on the board, dressed like they had somewhere better to be, but clearly didn't. I opened the door before they could knock a second time. Mr. Mercer, she said, skipping any kind of greeting. We need to discuss the water situation immediately. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, taking my time before responding. Funny, I said. I was thinking the same thing about my fence. Her jaw tightened. That matter is under review, she said. But right now, our community is facing a serious infrastructure issue, and if your actions are contributing to that. I cut in. The guy next to her shifted uncomfortably. Look, he said, trying a softer approach. We just need the water restored while we sort everything else out. Residents are already complaining. Residents, I said, pushing off the frame and stepping forward just enough to make them both take a half step back. You mean the same residents who thought it was okay to send a crew onto my land and tear down my property without so much as a conversation? That was a compliance issue, Caroline snapped. Your fence was on my land, I finished. Built with my money, maintained by me, and removed by you. Silence again. Then she straightened up, switched tactics. If there's been a misunderstanding, she said, measured now, controlled again, we're willing to address it appropriately. But withholding water to essential community facilities could have legal consequences. There it was. Not an apology. A warning. I nodded slowly, then reached behind the door and pulled out an envelope I'd already prepared. Inside were 3 things. An itemized estimate for rebuilding the fence, higher than what it originally cost, because now it included labor, materials, and expedited work. A report detailing the damage to my land from the equipment they'd used. And a calculation, 10 years' worth of water usage fees, based on current rates. I handed it to her. She opened it, scanned the first page, then flipped to the second, then the third. And then she laughed. Not loud, not amused, just that short, dismissive kind of laugh people use when they think something's beneath them. This is absurd, she said. We have no formal agreement for any of this. Exactly, I said. That seemed to land. But not the way I expected. Because instead of backing down, she closed the folder, handed it back to me, and said, then we'll let our attorneys sort it out. I shrugged. Go ahead. And before either of them could say another word, I stepped back inside and closed the door. And just like that, whatever chance there was of resolving things quietly was gone. After I closed that door, I didn't feel victorious, not yet. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that, heavier, like setting something in motion that you know is going to hit harder before it settles. And for the next couple days, that's exactly what happened. They didn't call again right away. Instead, they tried to work around me. By the end of that week, I started seeing water trucks rolling in through their main gate. Big ones too, the kind you use for construction sites or emergency supply. At first, I almost respected the effort, almost. Because on paper, it made sense. If the source is cut off, you bring in more water. What they didn't understand was that water wasn't their real problem. Filtration was. Without a continuous system feeding clean input, all they were doing was pouring fresh water into a failing cycle. And sure enough, it didn't take long. I drove by one afternoon, same spot outside the trees, and the pool looked wrong. Not just cloudy now, but thick. The surface had that dull, uneven texture, like something alive was spreading across it. The kind of water you wouldn't even dip your hand into, let alone swim. And the smell, even from the road, you could catch it when the wind shifted. That sharp, sour mix of chemicals trying to fight something they were losing to. Meanwhile, everything else started slipping. Their landscaping, the one thing they clearly cared about more than anything, started to show at first. Grass turning brittle at the edges, those perfectly shaped hedges losing their color, flowers wilting under a sun they suddenly couldn't keep up with. Turns out that extra supply from my well wasn't just about the pool, it was tied into more than they probably wanted to admit. And then came the noise. Not literal noise, but the kind that spreads faster. Complaints. Questions. Pressure. I don't have an account on their community page, but I didn't need one. A friend of mine, Rick, his cousin lives just outside the neighborhood. He started sending me screenshots. Posts from residents asking why the pool was closed. Parents upset about canceled swim lessons. Someone demanding refunds for a birthday party that got shut down last minute. Another one asking if the water issue was a health risk. Nobody was getting answers. At least not real ones. And that's when the calls started again. Different numbers this time. Board members. Managers. Even someone claiming to be their legal representative. I let most of them go to voicemail. Not out of spite, but because at that point, I'd already said what needed to be said. They just hadn't listened. About 10 days in, there was a knock again. Not as sharp this time. Not as confident. I opened the door, and there she was. Caroline. Same person, same posture, but something had shifted. You could see it in her eyes. Less certainty. More calculation. She wasn't alone this time either. Older man beside her, suit jacket despite the heat. Lawyer, no doubt. Mr. Mercer, she said, and this time there was a pause before she continued. We'd like to resolve this situation. I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside slightly, not inviting them in, just making it clear I was listening. The lawyer spoke next. My client is prepared to discuss compensation for the fence removal and any associated damages, he said, smooth, practiced, in exchange for the immediate restoration of water access. There it was. Not a demand this time. An offer. I leaned against the doorframe again, same spot as before, letting a little silence hang in the air before I answered. You read the paperwork I gave her? I asked, nodding toward Caroline. We did, he said, and he adjusted his stance slightly. We believe the figures are negotiable. I almost laughed. Everything's negotiable, I said. The question is, are you ready to actually negotiate, or are we still pretending I don't have any leverage here? That hit. You could feel it land between them. Caroline exhaled slowly, then stepped forward just a bit. What do you want, she asked. Not what do you need. Not what's fair. What do you want? That told me everything. So I gave it to her straight. I want my fence rebuilt exactly the way it was. Same materials, same layout. I want my gates replaced. I want the damage to my land repaired properly, not patched over. And I want payment for the water you've been using all these years without a contract. The lawyer nodded slowly. And going forward, I didn't miss a beat. We do it right this time. Written agreement. 20-year access lease. Paid up front. That got a reaction. Not dramatic, but enough. A glance between them. A quick calculation happening behind their eyes. That's a significant term, he said carefully. So is running out of water in the middle of summer, I replied. Silence again. Longer this time. Then Caroline spoke. If we agree to these terms, she said, the water is restored immediately? I shook my head slightly. Not quite. That's when she frowned. There's one more thing, I said. And I'll admit this part wasn't necessary. But it mattered to me. I approved the new fence design. The lawyer blinked, like he wasn't sure he heard that right. You approve it, he repeated. Yeah, I said. Since apparently my property affects your aesthetic standards. I figure it's only fair I get a say this time. Caroline held my gaze for a second, and then, to her credit, she nodded. Fine, she said. Just like that. No argument. No pushback. Because at that point, they didn't have room for either. We shook on it first. Not because I trusted the gesture, but because I wanted her to understand what it meant this time. Then the lawyer handled the paperwork over the next couple days. Real contracts. Real numbers. Signed, sealed, done. And only after that money cleared did I walk back out to that pump house. Same path. Same door. Same low hum waiting on the other side. I stood there for a second before opening it, not thinking about them, not thinking about the fight, just listening. Because in a strange way, that quiet had taught me something. Then I stepped inside and turned the valve back on. The system kicked in slowly, pressure building, flow returning, that steady rhythm coming back to life. And just like that, their world started working again. A few days later, I drove past the same stretch of road. The pool was blue again. Clean. Clear. like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better, because out on my side, the new fence was going up. Stronger, straighter, built the way it should have been, respected the first time. And this time, nobody was touching it without coming through me. Now here's the thing. Some people hear this story and think it's about revenge. Maybe it is a little. But to me, it was never about getting even. It was about reminding people that just because something looks simple on the surface doesn't mean it's not holding everything together underneath. And when you take that for granted, well, sometimes the whole system stops. So here's what I'm curious about. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments, because I've heard both sides, and honestly, I still think about it sometimes.